Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, 27th of March, 2017. A lot of news today about what is happening within the cities and a developing civil war. And as I've been talking about Uber a little bit yesterday and the revelations that we got over the weekend, it wasn't just simply that one accident in Tempe, Arizona. What we learned was that these Uber cars cannot drive more than a mile. It's less like 0.8 miles, okay, 3/4 of a mile before a human has to intervene. So when they talk about the car not really being at fault, you have the whole issue of defensive driving and that sort of thing. But there's a much larger issue beyond just the fact of whether or not these cars can work. And of course, they'll get the bugs ironed out of them eventually. What my concern is that they're not really going to work, especially if they want to talk about autopilot. That is never going to work unless they get all the human drivers off of the road. Because only if these things are working in a little control grid where the central computer controls everything will it work. And that's the problem, the centralization of control of our transportation. So we look at this story that's on the Drudge Report today. Thousands of Americans are fleeing the big cities. Understand that the bigger context of this whole self-driving issue is Agenda 21. And the motivation of people wanting to get out, of course, it's always a better lifestyle there. This has always been something people have strived for. We've had Thomas Jefferson talk about how big cities in his time were a threat to the health, the wealth, and the liberty of mankind. And of course, it's no different now. It does threaten your health and your money. It's expensive to live there, and it takes away your liberty to live there as well, to be packed like sardines. But they want us packed like sardines. And so we look at these self-driving car companies, these robo-taxi companies, whether it's Uber, whether it's Lyft. The Lyft CEO did a very long blog post where he was talking about where this is all headed. And of course, the guy was an urban planner. Urban planners don't like cars because cars can take you out of their domain. They want to keep you confined in their cities. And that's why the government picks those kinds of people to plan our cities. They want to confine you into the cities. That's the UN agenda, Agenda 21. They've renamed it, expanded it, given it a more specific date, and called it the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainability. That's now what UN Agenda 21 is operating under. So now they're pushing, they've got a more certain date that they're pushing for. This has always been kind of fuzzy, 2020, 2025, 2030. Now they're saying 2030, we're going to have it there. So we see that happening. And at the same time, we have this other article at Infowars.com. British Special Forces are now going to be deploying to the streets of London permanently. They're not going to get off of there, okay? And as they put on the subtitle here on our site, the police state continues to expand through a problem, reaction, solution. See, they created the problem. They created the problem of mass migration, creating a civil war within our borders. And of course, that's the rest of the stories that we're looking at. That's the whole ball of wax. So we look at the globalism from the top, and we see TPP, we see the transatlantic partnership as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We understand that, I think, now because of Donald Trump. He made that very clear to people. He shut that down. But there's another struggle that is going on within our country. It is a political struggle for power, and it is a struggle of demographics that they have created. And so when you look at what's happening here in London, this is a demographic problem that they created. They brought in numbers that could not be assimilated, a massive number of people who did not want to be assimilated. They wanted to remain separate. They self-ghettoized into these areas. And it's going to be the second generation that is going to be more dangerous because they're going to be very resentful of the fact that they see they're living in a different standard of living than the rest of the people around them. They don't remember where this came from. Yeah, there's going to be a civil war. We're going to break down these articles, but that's really kind of the nexus of what's going on. And we're also going to talk about the failure to repeal Obamacare. What does that mean? Where did that come from? And where do we go next? We'll also take your calls. I want to get your opinions on it. But in the next segment, we're going to have, at the bottom of the hour, Alex Jones is going to be joining us with a report. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, March 27th, 2017. One of the stories at InfoWars today is Daniel Greenfield says the Civil War is here. Now, he's talking about a political civil war, but when I look at the news today, this is what we're truly seeing. And of course, it's not just a political civil war. Yes, things have heated up more than we've seen in our lifetime, but there is a civil war that is being engineered by the open borders and the mass migration. We can see this in the other articles. One of them is on Drudge Report right now from Infowars.com. Thousands of Americans are fleeing the big cities. It's a massive exodus out of the cities. Remember when everyone left the rural farms in the early 20th century and then went to the cities to find work as we needed fewer people to operate the farms? And of course, there were other issues that happened with agriculture, with the Dust Bowl and the Depression, that sort of thing. But they moved to the cities. Now they're starting to move away. Why? Well, I think they understand what is coming. It's not just the fact that it's expensive, it's dirty, it's crowded, it takes away your freedom. No, they're moving away because they're concerned about what is coming. I think people intuitively understand this. And we've talked multiple times, I have, about the fourth turning by Strauss and Howe. These are a couple of historians, demographers. They invented the term millennials. They saw a cycle going back about 500 years, going through American and English history. They saw a cycle about every 80 years, and they broke the 80-year cycle into 4 generations. And they see us at that fourth turning right now. A point in time, about every 80 years, like we had with the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the New Deal, and now we see another major change coming. That's one of the reasons why Bannon, advisor to Donald Trump, said we need to deconstruct this regulatory state. And I was very surprised at the tactic that the Trump administration took by joining on with Paul Ryan, who does not want to deconstruct the regulatory state when it comes to Obamacare. When we look at that, they were going to leave it in place and essentially rearrange the deck chairs on this, what we ought to call Titanic care. Look, this whole government-run health care is headed for an iceberg. And Donald Trump pointed that out after the thing failed. He says, yeah, this is going to crash. It's going to be bad. But the plan that was created by Paul Ryan was simply going to slow it down so that maybe that would happen on somebody else's watch rather than this current administration. And meanwhile, they would rearrange the deck chairs, play musical chairs to see who's going to be in charge of this. It needs to be shut down. It needs to be stopped. They need to reverse course. It's not something that's easily done. There's a lot of momentum in government. But when we look at the different phases that they were talking about, understand that there was phase 1, which is going to get rid of some of the things with essential health benefits and some of these other things. But they were still going to say, we're still going to define what essential health benefits are for you in Washington. We're still going to define your health care for you. Then they say, but in phase 2, the Health and Human Services Secretary, HHS Secretary, Tom Price, is going to have some capability to make changes. He's got a lot of things that he can do because he's got this regulatory power. Why does he have that? He shouldn't have that. We shouldn't have a health czar. Because if Tom Price can fix some of this stuff with the wave of his hand and his pen and his phone, then guess what? We're going to have another dictator who's going to come along with a different administration or even a different HHS guy within the Trump administration. Who knows? When you set up somebody with dictatorial powers like this, and this is a problem throughout the government. When we have this committee that's going to look, Jared Kushner is going to now look at how to change Washington. One of the things they need to look at is how do we get rid of this regulatory state that is running our country in Washington. Congress isn't running the state. That's why both Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan can say, well, we have to pass this bill and then we'll find out what's in it. They weren't being cynical. They weren't being stupid. They were telling you, and Americans weren't listening, that they don't write the rules. The regulatory agencies write the rules. You can see that with the Dodd-Frank bill. They created the Dodd-Frank bill, and they created this massive bureaucracy, regulatory agency, and then they're waiting for this thing to crank out the rules. And yeah, tens of thousands of regulations, tens of thousands of pages of regulations these guys are going to be cranking out to control everything financially. Well, they want to control everything with your health care as well. And you wonder where that's headed? That's headed the same place that we have health care and food and everything else in Venezuela. So you want some Venezuelan health care? You want a czar in charge of your health care? Then keep this structure and just rearrange the deck chairs on it. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. So we see signs from within the Trump administration with Bannon and with Jared Kushner that they want to make some major structural changes. The key structural change that you have to make is to say that we're not going to allow the permanent, entrenched, unaccountable regulatory agencies to run our lives. You see, once we turn this over to them and it becomes regulatory law, then an agency like the EPA can come in and say, well, we're going to say that if you haven't gotten a permit from us, even though you got a permit from the state and the local government, and you got an 8-acre ranch like this individual in Montana did, and he got permits from the state and local government. He built a pond on his property, and they came in and said, well, we didn't approve it. We don't like what you did, so we're going to assess fines against you of $37,000 a day. And he says, well, first person would say, well, first of all, don't I get a trial? No, you don't, because it's regulatory law. With regulatory law, they say the prohibitions against making sure that the government gives you a trial, lets you defend yourself in court, gives you the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. None of that stuff applies with regulatory law. So the EPA, the IRS, the Obamacare, HHS, all these people can come after you and do whatever they wish, and then you have to sue them in court once they steal your money. And you don't have any prohibition against excessive fines. Look at the FAA when they said we're going to register drones. And by the way, if you don't register your drone and we find out about it, we're going to assess a $25,000 fine against you. Do you think that's excessive? I do, but they say it's a civil violation, not a criminal violation. So the Bill of Rights doesn't apply. See how they play that fiction? It's the same principle that's involved in civil asset forfeiture, where they can imply that they think that your car or your house or your property had something to do with drugs at some point in time. Or maybe they have a dog that smells cocaine on your cash, because virtually all cash, as we know from studies, virtually all cash has a smell of cocaine on it for whatever reason. Maybe we should ask the CIA why that's so. They would know. But if they smell coke on your cash, they just take your cash. They charge your cash with a crime and they take it. And then you have to go to court and sue them, or they take your airplane, or they take your business, or your home, or your car. And they say that property is guilty, we think, in some way. And you have to prove that it isn't. So you have to prove the negative. You have to go without that property. And then if you've got enough assets left to sue them in court, it's a very long, drawn-out process. But they can just keep that without even charging you with a crime and call it civil asset forfeiture. So when we look at Obamacare, the greatest failure in my mind is the failure to understand that we have a dictatorial socialist system involved here that is going to tell us, it's going to run our lives out of Washington, it's going to determine what's good and what's bad. And of course, you might agree with most of the stuff that Donald Trump's administration says is good, but you're not going to agree when the next Democrat comes in. And of course, the Democrats don't like what Donald Trump is going to do. We got to get back to a system where we have choices, where we have a marketplace. The only way that we're going to drive costs down in healthcare is if we get the government out of mandating it. The government cannot impose wage and price controls. Didn't we learn that with Richard Nixon? He was a Republican. He was foolish enough to do that. It was wrong. But when the government tries to centrally plan the economy, it fails. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at Venezuela. Look at Washington, D.C. We have to stop trying to centrally plan the economy. That's why it should have been repealed completely. We don't want to depend. Phase 2 was all about the HHS czar using his dictatorial powers out of Washington to fix it. Do you see the problem? If he was able to, quote unquote, fix it, then it would become fixed in place. It would become a fixture in Washington. That's what we saw with the Department of Education. Ronald Reagan was going to get rid of the Department of Education. He failed to do that. He made it bigger. It became fixed in place. It became a fixture. Are we better served when it comes to education today? No, we're not. We pay more, we get less. We get things like Common Core. We get things like manipulation of tranny bathrooms now from Washington. Why are we allowing this to happen? And why are we going to war with the only people who really understood that we've got to repeal this entire dictatorial infrastructure? And that's the House Freedom Caucus. They stood strong and against that. They're not the problem. The Democrats are not the solution. Turning to the Democrats for tax reform is, I don't even know what to say about that. That is so off the wall. I don't know how in the world we're going to get tax reform from Democrats. Taxes are their raison d'etre. That's what they justify. That's how they fund their expansive government, is with taxes. We are not going to get tax reform from the Democrats. So I want you to weigh in, tell me what you think about this failure of the, and again, as I say, it wasn't so much a political failure as it was a failure to recognize what the root of the problem is. The root of the problem is the fact that we're going to leave essential health benefits in and just tweak them. That we're going to leave the power of the HHS secretary in, and we're going to say that that's even going to be a way to fix it. No, it's not. Paul Ryan never wanted to get rid of Obamacare. Paul Ryan was there as a backup plan with Mitt Romney in case Barack Obama didn't win. They were going to put in Romney Care. They had already done Obamacare in Massachusetts with Ted Kennedy. They wanted the government to run our health care. They wanted the government to take over a fifth of the economy or whatever it's a large ratio, but they wanted that to happen. Paul Ryan has opposed every reform, and he's been very clever about it. This is just his most recent way of opposing it. And we have to get to the bottom of what the problem is. The problem is not how much it costs. We had a revolutionary war over a 3% tax on tea because they didn't like the structure. We got rid of the TPP because we didn't like the structure. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, March 27th, 2017. Today, we see the stock markets plunging. We heard John McCain crowing over the weekend in Brussels about how much he loves the New World Order and the European Union, and we need to have closer, tighter ties between the U.S. and the European Union for the New World Order. They're feeling very good because of what happened with health care, the failure to repeal. And I think we need to not feed this by panicking about that. And I would even say the same thing to the Republicans in Washington. Look, Donald Trump didn't win every primary, right? He didn't win every state in the election. But you can still win overall, and we've got a lot of things coming up. We can still regroup. We can still, if they want to, repeal Obamacare. And the sooner they do that, the better. But Alex Jones is going to be talking about what's going on with the stock market. Of course, we've been telling you a long time, this was a sucker rally. It was looking for a pin so that they could pop it and take advantage of everybody who was suckered in terms of optimism. Everybody understood that Donald Trump was going to be better for business than any Democrat would have been. So there was a lot of optimism. They manipulated that optimism into another stock market bubble. And now the first time something happens that they can say, look, it's not going to happen, then they use that pin to burst the bubble and take their profits. That's what's really going on. So don't lose heart. We haven't lost the war. We've simply lost a primary or a battle or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of interesting because we have this article at Infowars.com from Michael Schneider. Thousands of Americans are fleeing the big cities. It's on the Drudge Report. Subtitle, Why Are So Many People Suddenly Moving Away from Major U.S. Cities? He said, recently I wrote about the mass exodus happening out of the state of California. He said, many experts are completely mystified by this seismic demographic shifts that we're now witnessing. And here's some examples, some data points here. He says, counties containing Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore were the biggest population losers in the U.S. from 2015 to 2016, according to the Census Bureau. Cook County, Illinois, where Chicago is the county seat, had the largest population loss of any county in the country from 2015 and 2016. Cook County alone had a quote-unquote domestic immigration loss of more than 66,000 people. I should say migration, not immigration. But 66,000 people left Cook County, Chicago. Now, as I pointed out before, I said Jefferson said big cities are a threat to the health, the wealth, and liberty of man. So people have always looked for a way to get out of cities. That's why cars are so important to us, because they give us a chance to, if we have to work in the city, to live outside of the city, to escape that, to get into the suburbs. We don't want to be in the urbs, okay? You don't want to be in the urban areas. But the urban planners want to keep us there. That's why they're coming up with a complete control lockdown grid of our transportation system and turning you into someone who doesn't even own a car. They want you to rent everything from a couple of companies, and they want to track everything that you do. They want to control everywhere that you go. But he's also pointing out what else is behind this, and this is what we've been talking about here at InfoWars for quite some time. He said others, however, are moving away from large cities because they're deeply concerned about where things are ultimately headed in this country. People like Doug Casey, who we've interviewed on InfoWars multiple times. He has Crisis Investing. He believes that we could soon see a civil war set off by a financial collapse. Casey sees a coming crisis equal or worse than the Civil War. He says in the U.S. right now, there seems to be so much antagonism, it's almost like pre-Civil War. He thinks that a financial collapse will be the trigger. It's going to come down eventually. I'm worried about that, but we're in a situation where the country seems like it's just before a civil war. And then we see story after story of the political civil war that is beginning. That's why I said, we understand where this is headed. We are at a juncture, folks, and we better pay attention. Stay with us. Alex Jones is going to be right back. He's going to talk about the drop in the stock market.
Talk show host is Alex Jones. He's a conspiracy theorist.
Radio talk show host Alex Jones.
Alex Jones.
Jones is the wildly popular conspiracy theorist.
Radio talk show host and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones.
Deeply, I think, racist.
I just got called racist by MSNBC.
I don't want that man to have a gun.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
The Alex Jones Show. Watch the free stream live at Infowars.com/show.